Welcome to Generation Digital Workforce, the podcast that's here to explore the role of robotic process automation and other digital technologies. Whether you're just getting started or you're looking for advanced strategies and tactics, if you're curious about where human and digital workers are coming together to transform the future of work, then this podcast is for you. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome to Generation Digital Workforce. I'm your host for today's episode, Lisa Hackbarth. I'm joined today by Bart Peluso, Senior Vice President of Product Marketing at Blue Prism. Bart, how are you doing today?
Great, Lisa. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to be doing the show with you today. Great. Well, I'm excited to have you on the show today. So today, Bart will be sharing from his wealth of experience around what he's seen in the market around the stages of RPA adoption. So for our listeners who are new to RPA, we're talking about robotic process automation. So Bart, do you mind giving a quick definition for that?
I'd love to. Blue Prism coined the phrase RPA back in 2008 when we were looking for terminology that could clearly articulate the automation of a process end to end, from the beginning of the process through the work that has to be done, the execution, the validation and confirmation, even the escalation if it's needed within the process. So we came up with the term Robotic Process Automation, or RPA, and now it's the second most searched term on Gartner.com, so it's now almost a household word.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic for sure. It's an exciting time to be in the industry. So I think our topic today I think it will be definitely very helpful for companies who are either considering launching an RPA program. And I think it'll also be helpful for those who have already started an implementation and maybe they're looking to understand where they're at on their journey or benchmark where they are. And then also, I think, to get a vision for where they want to go. But before we dive in, I think just to give our listeners an understanding of who you are and your background, Bart, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to in the world of work?
Sure. I have been in software product marketing for the enterprise now for well over a decade. Prior to that, was entrenched in the networking world. I left a VP position at Cisco to join this small automation startup of 40 people called Blue Prism. And over the past 4 years, we've built the organization up to over 1,000 employees, over 2,000 customers, and over 500 partners.
That is crazy growth for sure. So I think it's a testament to what we're doing, which is very exciting. So I would love to jump into our topic. So I think where we want to start, you'll be sharing about the stages of adoption of an RPA program or platform. And so where do we want to get started? I think maybe, when we're talking about in our pre-call, we talked about, when a company is getting started or looking to get started with RPA, where do they start? What are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish?
Right. We have seen 3 stages or levels of the adoption of automation, and these are through really large organizations. And we've worked with them over the years. As a matter of fact, when Blue Prism was founded back in 2001, it was a consultancy to a few banks, Barclays Bank, Lloyd's Bank. They still remain customers today. So we've seen them evolve, and we've seen other customers evolve. I think as a bit of a preamble, we can talk a little bit about the history of robotic process automation to get a better understanding of the stages of adoption. So there has been an evolution of work throughout history. Going back to the cotton gin, there's been a natural progression of companies, organizations, and people trying to make things more efficient. And we saw a major milestone in the 90s with the advent of fiber optics and the internet, and we saw a migration to outsourcing. Back in 1993, the average cost a domestic customer service rep here in the U.S. was about $21 per service hour fully loaded. However, when they were outsourced, it came to about 163 rupees out of India or other places within the Middle East, which was about $2.50. So there was a huge drive to outsource back office work and processing work that required thought. It required human judgment. You know, it wasn't just automatic calculations that could be done by computers at that time. So with the advent of the overseas call center, there were a couple of organizations that developed. One was Shared Services, or the SSON, which was an organization of companies that were outsourcing, and the other was the International Association of Outplacement Services, which is the organization of the call centers themselves. So business process outsourcing, or BPO, drove new IT niches, one of which was desktop automation, right? And this is kind of the prerequisite to the first stage of automation adoption. Companies like Automation Anywhere, Kapow, and some others worked on software that sat on the desktop within the call center and automated via the desktop. We also saw the advent of BPM, business process management software, that would help organizations manage how people and computers work together. An example of that is, say, Appian. And at the same time, founders Dave Moss and Alistair Bathgate were looking at a third option. So you can hire somebody to do work, option one, you can outsource it, or you can go with this third option. And that was Blue Prism, a third sourcing option to hiring humans or outsourcing. And at that point, the world started to become digital. So the timing was quite right for automation.
Okay, so that's really interesting, Bart. So, why do companies want to automate?
Well, automation is the driving force for transformation. And we've seen disruption in various marketplaces. And this disruption has been unprecedented. For over 6 decades, a television network competed with other television networks. Now they compete with the streaming service. Hotel chains competed with other hotel chains. Now they compete with consumers through Airbnb, And of course, look what we saw with taxi cabs and Uber. So companies need to disrupt themselves, and it's directly impacting CEOs to come up with ways to change, to transform. What automation does is it accelerates that transformation, and it's the supporting foundation of transformation.
That's really interesting. So, Bart, can you give us some examples of, the first companies? What were they doing? Maybe what industries were they working in, or what were some examples of people getting started with automation?
Yeah, so the early adopters of automation were the finance industry, banks essentially, as well as insurance companies, because they wanted to provide better and more streamlined services to their customers, but they couldn't scale up their staff, which would increase costs. As a matter of fact, they had to scale down. And that's where Blue Prism started as a consultancy to banks, showing them how to automate the back-end processes and accentuate a human interaction on the front end.
All right. So Bart, where did these early adopters start in the first place?
Well, they started with the first stage or phase of automation, which is what we call enterprise RPA. Now, this is different than what was being done on the desktop out in the call centers. And some of those desktop solutions are available, but they operate and function on a desktop, almost for an individual. The banks and the insurance companies, the early adopters of RPA, especially with Blue Prism, began with enterprise RPA. This was leveraging of digital workers who transact. Now, a digital worker or a robot is different than a bot. A bot is an automated process. It sits on a desktop computer, and every process that you automate is considered a bot. Blue Prism uses digital workers, and what that means is the robot, okay, the entity that's doing the work is separate from the process. So back in the early 2000s, these banks, or mid-2000s, used the Blue Prism Design Studio to drag and drop different shapes to create a process. And we drag and drop these shapes across something similar to a Visio diagram. The reason that Design Studio was created was because when you're designing a process for a human being, right, you tend to get a dry erase board and draw circles and shapes and arrows and say, this is step one, this is step two, then you do step three. And so we took the way people design a process for humans, and we designed a process for our digital workers. And the digital workers are separate. The compute is separate from the process. And this is really the first stage of automation. This is enterprise RPA. It's deterministic, and it deals with structured data, right? What that means is that the robots or digital workers are transactional. They transact things that the business requests. So a good example would be, we have Coca-Cola as a company using automation to respond to marketing campaigns. We have many insurance companies, the early adopters, and what they were doing was managing accounts or signing up new accounts via digital workers that were doing the transaction. And it was business-led, right? It's the business that builds the process that the digital workers execute. And it had enterprise scalability. Unlike the desktop solutions, the early banks and insurance companies would scale. As a matter of fact, we have as our customer the largest bank in the planet, which is HSBC, and they use our digital workers across multiple continents. So you have that enterprise scalability, and it also involves an element of workflow scheduling, okay? So that means a digital worker could have a bunch of work queued up, right? When you segregate a digital worker or a robot from the process you're designing, then one digital worker can have 1,000 tasks or jobs lined up in a queue or a line for it, or 1,000 digital workers can all do the same process. That is what we refer to as enterprise RPA. And that's what the banks and the insurance companies adopted throughout the mid and late 2000s. The second stage of automation adoption is intelligent automation. And we've seen this over the past few years. It's also deterministic, but it doesn't just deal with structured data. It deals with semi-structured data, right? And these are digital workers who can adapt.
Great, Bart. So that's super interesting. So can you tell us, what does the next level look like?
The next level is called intelligent automation. So we're moving from enterprise to intelligent. And that's kind of where we are today. It's also deterministic, but it deals with semi-structured data, meaning some of the data is unstructured. And this is digital workers or robots who adapt. So let me give you an example. We have an insurance company that's been our customer for a really long time, and they have a small amount of robots or digital workers, and they are used for account management, price quoting, new accounts. But when there is an event that spikes insurance claims, say a hurricane in Florida, the digital workers would adapt to rules of engagement, and they would literally stop doing their day job of processing new accounts and doing account management and move over to fulfilling claims. These are digital workers who adapt, right? This is intelligent automation. Now, some of that intelligence comes from the way that the processes are designed and the way that they're queued up in the Blue Prism control room. But other ways they adapt has to do with artificial intelligence. So customers today are using Blue Prism to connect to AI offerings. And in most cases, they do that within a few clicks. So Google offered up Google Cloud, which has various natural language processing and artificial intelligence and machine learning APIs. They offered up 150 APIs through our digital exchange. Our customers download these APIs into Blue Prism, and they add the element of intelligence. It doesn't have to be from Google. It could be from Microsoft Cognitive or IBM Watson or 300 other different providers of what we call new technologies, AI, machine learning, natural language processing, cognitive, right? And so when someone is building a process for the digital worker, they can then drag and drop this component into their process. And as part of the automated process, there'll be an element that includes IBM Watson or an API from Google Cloud, right? This is digital workers who adapt. This is intelligent automation. And this is what our largest customers are leveraging today, usually in a COE or center of excellence. Now, there's one more piece on intelligent automation, and that is the categorization of AI and machine learning and cognitive. How do you categorize that, right? So, because there's so many different offerings out there, the way we categorized it is skills for our digital workers. And we have different skill sets, right? So when you're designing your automatic process, you go to the skill that you need. So for instance, character reading, right? OCR is considered a vision skill. So you go to vision and you pull that skill over. And that's how you design an intelligent process for these digital workers who adapt.
So Bart, there I get this vision of the Matrix. Is that kind of like it when you sit down and you go, I want to learn Kung Fu, and you plug it in and it downloads and now your robot knows Kung Fu?
You know, we've used that analogy before. There's some slight similarity because, yes, you're dragging a skill across the process, including it into the automatic or the automated process that you designed. And yes, the digital worker, which is ultimately binary, right? It's ones and zeros, it's compute, does learn that skill instantly. So it is a good analogy. Well, I just wanted to go back and reiterate that the enterprise RPA is when you have your software robots or digital workers transacting, right? They're doing back office transaction. When you add the element of skills and intelligence, they're adapting. They're adapting to their environment. They're adapting to the needs of the organization. And that's where we are today. We went from enterprise RPA years ago to intelligent automation today. But the most important thing and the most exciting, at least for me, is where we're going in the future.
Yeah, so tell us about that. I know if we're at phase 2 and there's still a phase 3, I think that's definitely the part where we get to start thinking about sci-fi movies, right?
It is, and there's a lot of hype and some confusion in the marketplace. So I'm going to try to give the listeners here some practical examples.
Perfect.
But we have migrated from enterprise RPA through intelligent automation, and where we're going is what's known as fully integrated digital workers. This is non-deterministic, meaning they deal with unstructured data and they structure it. They pull it together. This is digital workers who think. It deals with analytics and discovery. It deals with machine learning, getting smarter. It deals with natural language processing, whether that's voice or text. And there is a human in the loop component to it, meaning there is a point where the digital workers are communicating with a human being, usually a customer service representative, or it could be a customer, right? It's not full Skynet. So to give you an example is, we have an AI component that we've been developing. It's been in beta for a while called Decipher. So let me give you an example of digital workers who think, okay? Kind of leveraging the Decipher component of Blue Prism. But let's say you're paying invoices. And if you take the world's largest banks, the world's largest consumer companies, they could literally have hundreds of thousands of invoices. So in the enterprise RPA, in the stage 1, someone would outline the process and say, you pay these bills, and a digital worker would just literally automatically click through them. In the intelligent phase, you literally drag and drop a component that allows them to adapt to changes and look at invoice numbers, right? And do comparisons month over month. Where we're going with fully integrated digital workers, stage 3, the digital worker would physically think. So here's how it would work in the invoice scenario. You have 100,000 invoices coming through, and we created a process to pay, to have the digital worker pay the bills, pay the invoices. An invoice would come through, and the digital worker would record the invoice number. And then another bill, same thing. The third bill may not have an invoice number. It may have a vendor number. Okay, so the digital worker would query that and say, wow, this one doesn't have an invoice number, but I think the vendor number, because it has a similar amount of digits or where it is, may be the invoice number. And it would send that. It could be escalated. So it winds up on a manager's desk, and the manager says, yes, when you get a bill from this particular company, the vendor number stands for the invoice number, and sends that over. Well, now that digital worker knows when it gets that type of bill to look for a different type of number, right? That is machine learning because it's a machine and it's learning. Now, when you look at a huge scale, right, a company like Walmart has 500,000 employees and all the processing they do, you'll have a lot of inputs going in to your digital worker, and your digital worker will continually get smarter and smarter and smarter. And over time, they not only will do comparisons month over month, say, well, Lisa's cell phone bill is always $100, but this month it's $200, and query that. It would actually look and say Lisa's cell phone bill is usually $100. This month it's $200. But I see she traveled to Europe and had international calls, and kind of evolve. That's the machine learning component of it. The analytics component of fully integrated digital workers is the bank of data that it stores, right? Is knowing how Lisa's cell phone bill compares to the other 500,000 employees, right? And how they all compare and what the average and what the mean is, and, what the anomalies are and how often they occur. That's the analytics piece. The machine learning component is when a human goes in and says, with this particular bill, this number means this. And then that input from the human, which is human in the loop, by the way, is retained by the digital worker. Another piece is the natural language processing. So anyone who has an iPhone is familiar with when you send a text, it'll try to predict what word you want to say, right? And you'll have like 3 options and you pick one. Realize that prediction gets smarter and smarter and smarter over time. And different people tend to use different types of phrases. Okay, part of that is the processing of the text, and in some cases, it can be voice activated. It doesn't necessarily, at least with fully integrated digital workers in the automation world, it doesn't have to be text. It could be voice, it could be chatbots, but that's where we're going with fully integrated digital workers. So those are the 3 phases in the evolution of automation: enterprise, RPA, intelligent automation, and fully integrated digital workers.
All right, super interesting, Bart. So anything else that would be helpful for our audience as we sign off here? Any practical tips that you can give?
Yeah, I would recommend learning more, getting involved. A lot of the analyst organizations now have reports on this category we created called RPA. You're also welcome to go to blueprism.com. There's a lot of content, white papers and such that are free downloads. There's the Blue Prism community where you can interact with users of actually all 3 phases of automation adoption. And there's also our Blue Prism University, which is essentially training and a knowledge base. So I would say, get involved and learn what you can. There's some really exciting stuff going on today, and we are really at the precipice here of automation adoption. We are just crossing the chasm indicative of Gartner's MQ, which was the fastest MQ in the history of Gartner from concept to delivery. So now is the time. It's super hot. There's a lot of good information there. I would invite you all to go to Blue Prism community, blueprism.com.
And we'll include links to everything that Bart just mentioned in the show notes, so you can check there for more information. Well, to wrap us up, Bart, I really appreciate your time. I think it's been super interesting, and I think our audience will get a lot of value out of everything that you shared. So before we wrap up, Bart, if anyone has questions who might be listening, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yes. You can find me via LinkedIn or blueprism.com. I am bart.peluso@blueprism.com.
Perfect. And again, we'll include that in the show notes for anybody that wants to reach out. So again, Bart, thanks so much for your time. To our audience, thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to Generation Digital Workforce. If you want to hear more about RPA, AI, and other cognitive technologies that are shaping the future of work, join us next time as we continue to go deeper on these topics with industry innovators and experts. To make sure you never miss a future episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. And if you've liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. It's one of the best ways to help more people find valuable content. For show notes and more info, visit us at blueprism.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.